the impact of using, you know, your site as a means to reach people? How do you think?
Well, because people
that'll
listen. I
work?
mean, it's you know, there's an audience that's developing, and it's growing, not just in terms of numbers, but it's growing in age spans where people are finding this to be a great source of information. Gives them an opportunity to draw firsthand conclusions about operations without having to translate press releases and
Right.
and gibberish that can come out in ways that filter what people are what they'd like to get. They want to get as much reality in this as they can in drawing their conclusions. And in the past, we've relied on historical. Our trust was in a columnist, or our trust was in a political writer who we, over the years, developed a confidence in that was getting it right. When I was growing up, God, I just about to say his name, who wrote all the, you know, the Making of the President's books. Ted,
David Howard.
No, Ted.
Oh, Theodore White.
Not Sorensen, but it was Ted. Who wrote
White.
Teddy White, and it was a great source. You know, I said sort of that Teddy was a wonderful guy, but he was kind of, he had a candidate, you know, and that's how you know. It was a little bit different view as he was telling this a very objective story about a candidate. So today, I think people realize that, and they're looking for honesty in this stuff, and they want to get some real reflections on where people are. So it's a great, and plus you're reaching people that don't normally want to pick up the local newspaper and read a columnist. So it's been a great avenue for opening things up.
So kind of the flip side, one of the things that I noticed today that I was really troubled by, the presserizer had 30 or 40 cameras during Clinton and Obama's speech, and then went down to like 3 for your speech. I mean, how? I mean, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy at a certain level. But how can you do stuff like this and other things to get beyond that?
Well, it's what we have to do, and up until now we've done we're building an operation solidly. I'm a great believer that the law of physics applies to politics as well, and the arc of ascendancy and descendancy are directly related in politics. And we're building an operation that is solid, with good people coming in and know what they're doing on the ground. And we did that through the latter part of last year and the early part of this year. And we're now going more public with positions. And this is a quarter when we're getting out, and we put out our energy policy. We put out very clear language on Iraq. We're going to have very clear language on national service, on a whole series of things that we think people are interested in. Foreign policy we've done already, which is beyond Iraq, just looking at all of this. And as we do that, and we'll begin to do more of engaging the public more directly with these things, a more aggressive media operation, for lack of better words, so that we're breaking through and not just relying on having it filtered by a columnist or a writer. And I'm hearing from major political writers that their editors are saying there's only so many inches.
Right.
And we're given the inches based on celebrity, in a sense. And they know it. I mean, I've had stories cut off where I know I'm there, see my name, and then you can just see the snip. The person there that just, you've just died right there at some editor's desk on it. So it's, yeah, it's frustrating a bit, but it's early yet. The election's not tomorrow, next month, and you got a chance, I think, on some of these issues to break through. The frustration of having, Brian Williams say that according to Tom Friedman, not a single person has advocated a carbon. I'm going, yeah, man. And I felt like I was back in grade school, waving my arm, trying to get parochial school, trying to get the sisters' attention,
That was the first thing I saw when I heard that.
And we've sent Tom the stuff. I mean, but that was the days when But I'll tell you, the good news is that because of the bloggers, when we gave the speech, 2.5, whatever it was, there's been all over the blog. People have been talking about it, commenting about it, getting good reviews. I mean, Al Gore held a press conference about it because he read about it. We got it to him. We got it to Bill Bradley, and good comments from Bradley and others about it. We sent it around to people to have them react to it. We had great comments from the environmental community that said it's the one candidate out who has taken a position that is logical, that actually gets you to that point instead of just talking about it. So I'm very grateful that there's now avenues by which I can be heard. So it is frustrating at this point, but I got 9 months to make this case, and I got 4 states to run, relatively small states to make my case. 2 of them are very organizational. Iowa and Nevada are really organizational. It's caucuses, and you got to, a caucus, you got to go for 2 hours. You got to be there when it opens. You got to stay until it closes. You got 15% of the people in the room, or your guys don't come. It's a, it's not a, it's an awkward system, to put it mildly. Primary states are a little bit differently, but I'm a neighbor in New Hampshire. I've been up there a lot. They know me. I'm not a stranger in all of this. And we had good crowds. I mean, they're not, I'm not drawing thousands of people, but I mean, I'm getting 100 people, 75 people who'll show up, and these are activists. And you begin with that community. I mentioned the numbers. I mean, the carry numbers are always surprising. I'm always amazed, the amnesia, I call it. The people don't have any history. They go back and say, well, what happened the last time around? No, every different case is different. And you get them, so.
Great.
So it is frustrating, but if we're sitting talking this way in December or January, we got a problem. But in April, I'm okay. I'm alive.
Can I really quickly follow up on the carbon tax?
Sure.
With the carbon tax, how much effective with directly to consumers on gas and gasoline, and what about the possibility of just putting a gas tax on, increasing the gas tax?
Well, that I think is we had run a maelstrom and directly to the consumer. That's why we did a corporate carbon tax.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't laid out the division. The low number on an annual basis is 50 billion. Although some think it goes as high as 100 billion annually that you could actually get through the corporate carbon tax. And my first is to fast track, and again, I haven't divided this up, but the fast track the alternative energy ideas to really have them come online more quickly by putting the resources into that board. And then very quickly, because the whole goal here is while you may get a slight increase in your fossil fuel products, the idea is I want to equalize or better what consumers will pay. So we put up a gasoline station, and there's the tank with your unleaded and your leaded. There's also a pump that's right there that offers ethanol or some other product at a fraction of that cost. Now you're the consumer. Now put aside the question of what we'd like them to do. The prices might have been my major barrier. So this is a vehicle by which I get to equalize or improve price for people. Most people, I think, are there already. The great news is people would like to make these choices. But if you're a middle-income family, struggling with a few kids, you know what you'd like to do. But you go up there, and I got two consumer items. I got two appliances. One I know is fuel efficient, better for my health, better for the environment of the country and the world, and the other one's not. But there's a differential in price, and I'm trying to feed and hold a family together. That price becomes my barrier to this. And the problem with oil is it's so elastic in price. We can do a lot of things with alternative energies at $70 a barrel. Then we're pretty competitive. Drop that price $10, $20 a barrel, which they could do and make tons of money, and then all of a sudden I'm out. I got that consumers going, hey, I'd like that. I understand you're right. I know you're right. But the cost is just pushing me elsewhere. So that's why you've got to do this. And I think it's a way, we're told it maybe at 10 cents. I mean, others have looked at this, and I don't claim to be an actuary here who's looked at all of this, but the prices are really not significant. And I say to audiences, look, we're spending $300 billion a year going offshore to buy this stuff. Who's paying for that? You're paying for that at the pump. And 60 to 100 billion of it is going to countries who are relatively hostile to our interests. I mean, it would seem to me that middle-income people who don't like the idea of subsidizing countries who are hostile to our interests would be very attracted to the idea of supporting something that would cost them less, clean up the environment, improve their health, reduce the threats to national security, and allow us to become a source of new jobs in the country. I mean, there are a lot of jobs available here. I mean, we used to be, it pains me to see that we used to produce, I think we had 4 or 5 companies that produced wind turbines in the United States. We're down to 1 now. I think Denmark and Germany are the ones that are doing more of that today. We're kind of giving away that technology, but this is real opportunities for us in the country. So I think manufacturing ought to be a part of the U.S. economy in the 21st century. And how do you get there? Not just holding on to the ones we want to hold on to, but expanding new opportunities. There was actually, in the early part of the 19th century, there was a debate in Congress about eliminating the patent office, because the argument was everything had been discovered. And they actually talked about doing it. And I almost hear that today. Televisions, we gave it away. Television's a television. Plasma. Oh, gee, I'm sorry, I didn't think of that. Someone else did. So now, a whole industry emerges elsewhere because someone else was working on a new generation of technology that allowed someone to, to go forward and produce a lot of jobs.
Switching to Iraq for a minute, your colleague from Illinois had made some comments about a couple of months ago that could be construed as suggesting that this was a game of chicken that Congress was playing with the president and saying that if the president vetoed the bill, then it would be politically unwise for Congress to keep going on their current course, and it would be smarter to offer something that imposed a little less restrictions as far as withdrawal deadlines. What's your feeling on that? What's the next step after Bush vetoes the bill? Do you send him something else, or do you send him the same thing? What do you do?
Well, I think any proposal you send them that doesn't have some definition to it is wrong. I mean, I think it's the only hope of Iraq achieving any stability at all, of the political and religious leadership of that country coming to the conclusion, which they obviously are very reluctant to come to, each thinking they're going to dominate the situation. And in either case, it seems to me, that's not in our interest. If it's a Sunni victory, then there's a possibility of Al-Qaeda maybe having more influence. If it's a Shia victory, then maybe Iran has a greater victory. In a sense, it seems to me it's in our interest that we want them to figure out some way to reach some accommodation. They're obviously not doing it under the present scenario. And so it seems, and I can't, as I said, there's no guarantee I have to, you're going to do it under one I've suggested to you, but it can't be any worse than the one we presently got, given the cost associated with it.
Would you send him the same bill back?
Well, of some variation of it. If you want, you want to play with some dates on the thing. I mean, someone came back and said, well, look, you got to have 14 months instead of 12 months. Or, I mean, I'm more than happy. But the motion of putting bookends on this, I think, is extremely important. And I think in the absence of that, this is going to get played out again. And they're not going anywhere. This president said what he wants to do. He wants to hand this problem to the next president of the United States. Now, he's been very clear about that. And it seems to me that if the American public, I'm telling you, I can't tell you the number of people who stop me and say, don't quit on this. I had a guy the other day, he said, I'm a big Republican. I've never voted for a Democrat in my life. Getting off a plane, going up to New Hampshire. I'm asking you guys, don't quit on this. I really do believe this is not a question of a bunch of Democrats fighting a bunch of Republicans on this. I honestly believe the American public are so far beyond where we are on this that they really want clarity on this. They want clarity, and clarity will help. But you got to combine that with diplomacy, with politics, the stuff we do. We used to do pretty well. I mean, Richard Nixon could sit with Mao Zedong. Can you imagine this president doing that? I mean, or Ronald Reagan talking about the evil empire, but still going to Reykjavik to deal with arms control. I mean, this is the first administration of my lifetime, Republican or Democratic, who treats this very well used and effective arrow in our quiver, diplomacy and politics, as a threat, as a weakness, and it's costing us dearly. So we need to have a conversation too about not just the military issue in Iraq. We got to get beyond that, because those of us who are advocating this, I think, have to backfill what comes next, what comes after. So I'm a great advocate of examining these questions. What Jim Baker said. I mean, you're talking about a conservative Republican. How many times did he meet with Assad? 15 times. And in the 15th time, he got some satisfaction on a multiple of issues they cared about.
Senator, could you talk to us about the status of your restoration of habeas corpus, your bill that you put together, and how is that progressing through the Senate? Is it progressing through the Senate?
No, it's not progressing.
What's happening?
I got very far with it at this point.
And what do you think are the best steps for people who want to see the habeas corpus restored?
Well, first of all, I really thought that this would have such a limited audience that people wouldn't really know what I was talking about. It was just kind of one of those things that I was going to go right over people's heads. And I remember one night, several months ago, I was talking about it at a dinner in New Hampshire. And people were listening and, being responsive on various things, on healthcare and education, and so I was talking about. And I thought, I'll mention this thing. I don't know if anyone is interested. And people came out of their chairs. I mean, I didn't realize how widely followed this issue was, and how strongly people felt about it. And again, it cuts across ideological lines. I mean, this is a pretty intimidating notion that you're being held by the United States of America, and you can be deprived on what you're charged with, an opportunity to be heard. Is a pretty eerie notion for people. Not to mention the torture. You know who my best advocates were on this, by the way. And I know this comes as a shock to people. The people who helped me write that bill were the senior officers of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the Pentagon. So the people who do this for a living.
They were disgusted by it, right?
Disgusted by it. In
Weren't
fact,
they
called
sat
me.
into a room and told that they had to support it to begin
Well,
with?
before Bob Gates, took over as Secretary of Defense, we got, got calls quietly coming in saying, listen, when you meet with Gates, would you please tell him that he's got to stop right now because the regulations are going to be issued. And we want him to stop them because we think Rumsfeld is going to run these regulations along and there'll be a fait accompli by the time Gates gets there. That was all coming from the senior military people. And they're practical reasons. Put aside for a second, how people feel about this from a moral standpoint. I'm not minimizing that. But from a practical standpoint, what is the effect of this? First of all, for a real terrorist that you want to try and prosecute and punish, the idea you're going to get a conclusion to a trial is probably years away now. These things will be litigated forever. So if your interest is finality in a judicial process for people who legitimately ought to be prosecuted under this, under our statutes dealing with this behavior, it's going to be harder to get it. Secondly, anyone who's ever been involved in interrogations will tell you that torture is a very, very shaky means if you're soliciting one information that's going to be helpful to you. And thirdly, of course, you subject your own people to that kind of behavior, which we obviously want to try and avoid. And lastly, when it comes to the Geneva Conventions, we're dealing, and I believe it's, listen, I'm not denying at all this, the global problems and threats with this tactic. Terrorism is not a philosophy, it's a tactic. And the tactics out there need multinational cooperation. How do you get multinational cooperation when you're walking away from the very structures and architecture that allow you to bring these up and pursue them in a collective, collaborative fashion? And so from all 4 points, aside from the morality issue, this is really a bad idea that we've come forward. And we're trying to build some co-sponsorships and so forth. Pat Leahy's been great on it. I'm trying to think who else is on the bill. Kennedy.
I believe Boxer.
Boxer, I think, is on it, yeah. And look, I've said that if on January 20th, I'm the President of the United States, I don't know how much of this I can change by executive order. But
According to the current president, everything.
Well, then, welcome to the White House on January 20th. We'll reverse this. I have to get the legal scholars to tell me what I can do. But it's again, it's I was going to say something to Dennis Kucinich because he brought out his Constitution. His looked pretty new.
Oh.
Mine's 25 years old. I carry every day of my life, given by Robert Byrd. He's my seatmate. I fell in the water once with it. It's a little blurry. Whoops.
We got to get a picture of that.
Could I get a picture of that?
Yeah, sure. You mean the old signature?
Yeah.
My-
The battered Constitution.
Absolutely.
My friend Chris Dodd,
Dodd's
with great
Constitution,
personal esteem, I think. Sincerely, Robert C. Byrd.
See, you never know what a bunch of
What a bunch of bloggers are going to be
bloggers are
interested
going to be
in.
Well,
interested
that's
in.
good. And that's the Declaration of Independence
That's
and the
awesome.
Constitution. And and he's getting really old, he's not in great shape. He's a wonderful man. I sat next to him for 15 years, before the Senate. And, but, this is a, to see that, habeas corpus isn't in this, but I mean, the whole idea of it's being sort of trampled on. It's
Just out of curiosity, what sort of, relationship, like mentoring stuff, like, he did with you and stuff, do you have with this year's freshman class? Tester, and Brown had experience, but, Tester and Webb were, new to DC, and, what sort of, roles do you have with the new classes
Not
that
much,
you should come in?
not much. A lot of my time is doing this, and so I'm not as involved as I have been. Because I've spoken to them, I was asked to address them. I was chairman of the Rules Committee for a brief amount of time. Rules in the Senate is like being the head of Home Depot. This is not exactly, it's lamps and rugs and fixtures, and we have jurisdiction over campaign finance reform and elections. And so I did the HAVA bill, which made a difference in a lot of it. Still, we got a new bill to do more, but I did it under a 1-vote margin in a Republican House. And the fact that we got provisional balloting and statewide voter registration and a civil rights action and a few other things, not great, but it was a major step
This was
forward.
in 2002?
Yeah, it took forever. I mean, you get it. It's the first time since the Voting Rights Act the federal government's ever said it had any jurisdiction over federal elections. There's more to be done. So we had some jurisdiction beyond just, the fixtures in the Senate. And in that capacity, we were charged with responsibility of sort of introducing the new members, and I did a lot more of it then, but I haven't done much of it since. And I don't know who is, if anyone is. I presume maybe someone like Durbin is.
There is
Larry Reed's
a
office.
Fair Elections Act that he actually.
Well, that's, I'm talking about the education of new members.
Oh, I see.
But Jim Webb, I mean, was, former Secretary of the Navy, he's not exactly a
Yeah.
newcomer to Washington, I mean, under the Reagan years,
Can I
And Tester's terrific, by the way, and his instincts are very good. I mean, I think he's a real keeper, and he's got a real connection with his constituency in Montana.
So going back to jobs for a minute,
Yeah.
recent polling in California says about 49% of likely Democratic voters, guys you're going after, feel like they're falling behind, or rather, and
They are falling
They are falling behind. What would a Dodd presidency do to change that?
Well, one of the reasons they're doing it is because of the absence of union households. In fact, Ben Bernanke, you ought to be able to find it, someone ought to put it on a webpage, a speech he gave in Omaha, Nebraska about a month and a half ago, in which he identified the reason, one of the reasons, if not the reason, for the income inequality that's in the country is because of the absence of union households. This was President Ford's nomination to be the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. I mean, this is a very different guy in some ways. I'm not suggesting but he pointed out, he wasn't ideologically speaking, he was just identifying the fact that when there were more union households in this country, there was less inequality. So the right to people to organize, I've offered legislation dealing with the Kentucky River cases, where they declared that everybody who's a superintendent, or supervisor rather, for an hour,
Right.
you may have been a member of the bargaining unit for a week, and in case of nurses particularly, they'd vote in. And there are a number of other steps that could be taken where people have a better chance to organize. And so that people can collectively negotiate and bargain for better conditions and so forth has an awful lot to do with this. But obviously, dealing with energy, we talked about here already, is a major cost factor for people. And it's going to grow very dramatically and very quickly. Higher education costs, we eliminate the profit-making margin when it comes to student loans. If we associate the idea of a higher education as being critical. And the GI Bill wasn't a profit-making operation. That was a great return on investment for the United States when a whole generation of World War II veterans got off and got an education and came back. Someone did the numbers one time on what the collective incomes were of that generation that got that education and did well because they had the education in terms of the payback. Taxes that were
My
collected.
grandfather went to UCLA after
On the
the
GI
war.
Bill?
GI Bill, went to work for NASA.
Yeah. So there are a whole bunch of people out there who did that. So that is something we ought to be doing. The healthcare issue is, again, all cost-driven. Hospitals survive based on how many operations they perform. Drug companies survive based on how many prescriptions you're using.
Sure.
And so the incentives are all the opposite of what they ought to be. It's not based on healthy environment. 49%, if you wonder why I got an obesity problem with kids, 49% of your schools in the United States have exclusive contracts with soft drink companies and junk food because they don't have the money to meet the No Child Left Behind obligations and the rest. And then they go, wonder why we got an obesity problem. Where'd that diabetes come from, kids, and doing on diabetes? I mean, this is not brain surgery we're talking about here. And so when 34 cents on every dollar in healthcare is administrative costs, if you dropped it to 27%, that's $150 billion in savings. So that's what people are paying. So it isn't just the absence of healthcare. I heard Barack say this, but a lot of us are saying it. It's people who have insurance, that the costs are going up, so that's killing them in terms of their ability to make ends meet. And then obviously promoting, we talked about, an energy bill that would create new jobs and opportunities for people, and that can, give people some choices. But people losing jobs, I run to people who said, look, I was in the manufacturing side, and now I'm selling used cars someplace. I mean, I'm trying to raise a family on that. So they have a job, but so then there's a second job, and someone else got the third job and the fourth job, and trying to raise families and pay for child care and save for college education or retirement.
How problematic is underemployment? Because it's not counted in the employment statistics.
Oh,
So
people
how
stop
much of a
looking.
problem is this?
I don't know. I mean, you're right, because how we get statistics is people still looking for jobs. That's where the unemployment numbers come from. So I always think real unemployment is probably double. We're hovering around 4 or 5%, which is normally considered under Humphrey Hawkins as full employment. At 4% unemployment is considered pretty much full employment. But I always think we undercount. There are 10 million households in this country that have never been to a bank, a credit union, or a thrift, have never entered a mainstream financial institution, and get ripped off on an hourly basis. Thousands of dollars they pay, rural and urban poor, as a result of check cashing operations, payday lenders, money wiring operations in the back of convenience stores. that get ripped off because they don't have access to mainstream services. The mainstream services know how to suck money out of them through credit cards and subprime predatory lending. But the idea of access to capital for growth has been a major problem. That could do an awful lot, I mean, in my view. So.
We've got to get going. I'm sorry.
Anything else, quick?
Federal role of education, go up, increase it, go down? What do you think?
No, we ought to go up. Look, this is, again, I mean, it isn't just money, obviously. To talk about it just money, we contribute something like 5 or 6% of the entire federal budget for elementary and secondary education. A calendar that was written in the 17th century based on agriculture. I mean, it's incredible to me that we're still talking about a structure and a system that is so outdated. And we honestly think that 22 kids in a classroom can be taught by a single teacher. Or that after school our buildings are only to be used between 9 or 8 and 5 or something. And during summers and nights and weekends and vacations, we can't find better uses for these facilities. The distance learning and all the vehicles are testing kids. We don't know how to embed a test to make a judgment on whether or not a child is actually learning anything. I mean, the No Child Left Behind is goals I've always supported. Greater accountability, better results. But the idea that we don't think about what's coming out of this and how do we really evaluate how people are doing it? Do we take into consideration, you know, the population of certain schools where you have people that English is a second language as they're learning, or you have a lot of kids with severe learning disabilities that are part of that mix, and that school is being judged on a par with schools that have very limited problems in that area. One's failing, one's not. I'm not sure that the one that's so-called not failing is failing. The other one that's doing some very creative and imaginative things that are helping someone come out of that process. What's it producing at the end of that? That someone who has the skills, life skills, to go out and learn and be independent and productive. So this takes a lot of different thinking. This is why this job is so important here. If it's going to be basically status quo here, we're not going to move the ball forward. We got to get elected. You got to have someone get elected. And this is always about, in my view, whether or not people trust you. Two quick stories that I learned years ago. One is the first one is elections, in my view, are rarely about the candidate. I know people don't think that, but it really is true. People want to know if you're listening to them. The question that each one of us, when someone approaches and say, will you support me? Can I get your vote? We don't even know we're doing it a lot of times. We don't know how to say, it sounds rude to say, are you listening to me? I mean, every now and then someone says that. But an awful lot of times we'll ask you a question about your health care views or what's your policy on education or environment. And we use that as a shorthand way of really asking the question we're really asking. And that is, are you listening to me or paying attention? But I want to know if you know what I'm going through. And if I get a sense about who you are as a person, as a human being, now tell me about your 8-point plan to eradicate these other problems, and I may be for you. But if you don't answer the first question for me, to my satisfaction, I'm not likely to be for you. I don't care what your plans look like. Because you're leaving me, my first part of the decision comes here. Not here, but here. It's a primal reaction. It's how we draw conclusions about other people. You know, we meet someone in a line, you got an ice cream cone. We spent 5 minutes. We process. Not a bad guy. Didn't interesting person. Found them sort of, you know, we process and make a conclusion about it. A lot of people do that about people they're choosing for election. The great story was about, you know, what do you want as what do you want people to remember about you if you've been an elected official, a public official? And this was I don't know if it's a true story. This is a great story. I don't know how accurate it is, but the story allegedly about Roosevelt's funeral procession in Washington in April of 1945. And a reporter is interviewing the crowds that have gathered to pay their respects to Roosevelt. And one guy, as the story goes, apparently more grief-stricken than the rest of the reporter, looking for a good quote or story, goes up and says to him, or her, you must have known Roosevelt really well. He said, I didn't know Roosevelt at all. He said, well, why are you so seem more upset than the rest? And the story goes, I didn't know Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt knew me. And I think it's a great, whether accurate or not, it's a great point. And that that's really, at the end of the day, that's what better monument could you have erected to you than the people you've sought to represent say, you know what, that individual knew who I was. And that's about as good as it ever is going to get. And I think that's what people are looking for. At the end of the day, it's not even agreement all the time. They knew who I was. I may have agreed or disagreed from time to time, but they paid attention to me. And that's really what people are anxious for. We're not that divided. I really get annoyed if people say, oh, how divided we are. You got idiots out there and so forth that make you crazy, but most people are really looking for those saying they want some answers on this stuff, and they're waiting for political leadership. As I said out there, look at, these problems and solutions are far bigger than one party. I'm not going to get this stuff done just because of what I want to do. I'm going to have to sit down with the Orrin Hatches and the Thad Cochrans and other people, and that I can find common ground with them and say, look, we've known each other 25, 30 years. And I want you to work, I want you to sit down. The problem's not A to Z, it's A to D. You know it, I know it. Now let's get to work and get it done. And I think people are anxious for that to happen.
You mentioned these Republican senators. I don't think any blogger meeting would be complete without someone asking how your relationship is with Senator Lieberman.
Well, listen, Ned Lamont is up in New Hampshire for me today campaigning, and I'm very grateful to him. Where is he? At the University of New Hampshire and someplace else?
Southern New Hampshire.
Yeah. And so I'm grateful to that. And I made that decision in last August, which for those who this is an abstraction, it sounds easy enough. It wasn't easy. I mean, I had a 40-year relationship with Joe Lieberman on environmental issues, women's issues, education stuff, by and large. Been good. This was a major division on this question, and the people of Connecticut had a different result, and there's no way I could not recognize and support the legitimacy of that decision. And Joe and I are getting along fine. We see each other, we talk on the floor in the Senate, and this is a point of major disagreement. But there are 40 years of history of being with someone. I don't, despite my disagreements, this doesn't become my enemy. I disagree with him on this. And I supported Ned Lamont. I campaigned for Ned. I thought he was a good candidate. I thought he'd been a good senator. And I'm very grateful to him for getting out and carrying this on. It wasn't just about a campaign, but something he deeply feels and wants to do what he can to help make a difference. And his wife Andy's been great and a real help. I got to know their family a little bit. So life moves on. But I made the right choice. I did the right thing. But I can't tell you it wasn't painful. We've had friendships with people you've had a fundamental disagreement, had to make a choice about something that transcended for that time, that friendship. You know what I'm talking about. Everybody's had to do that at some point in their lives, unless you're somehow escaped on something the rest of us had to confront. And it's not easy. And I appreciate immensely the understanding that occurred by an awful lot of people who are your subscribers and people who pay attention to what you say. That some didn't, but a lot did, got it, understood it, and I'm grateful for that.
Senator, we gotta wrap it up, unfortunately.
This has been great. Let's do it. We'll do some more of it. We're gonna have
Yeah.
we'll have some fun stuff we're gonna do. Listen, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You know,
Keep
appreciate
pushing
it.
habeas corpus.
I'll
and
keep
that
pushing it.
Lieberman story,
Yeah.
it'll be fun in the net.
Yeah.
Guarantee
Thanks.
it.
Good.
Take care.
Tim knows how to get a hold of all of
Yeah,
us.
so, I missed it, and I took it off. You did a good job. Where's Matt? Is Matt around? Matt was good. Matt was,
A little picture.
yeah, sure. Nice to meet you. Nice to see you too. Yeah, fun.
Thank you. So Senator, do you ever Google yourself? Do you like what you see?
Join with me.
Absolutely.
What's your Wikipedia drop one too?
Isn't there-
Read what the blogosphere is saying about it?
Yeah, well, a lot of times.
I think it's
What's the,
largely
I was starting to think about blog, so do you like what you see? What's that?